Okay, good afternoon. So we have now seen the extension of the map of the psyche as it emerged out of the work with holotropic states, and now we'll apply it to the topic, talking about sources of human violence and sources of human greed. You know, there are obviously two extremely powerful forces that in some sense have been running the human history. If we look at human history, it is really a history of violence and greed. There's something in human nature that never has enough. You know, the question is, how much is enough? Mahatma Gandhi said, there is enough in the world to satisfy everybody's need, but there is not enough to satisfy everybody's greed. So there are people who have enormous amount of money, enormous amount of power, enormous amount of fame, and still having the sense that they don't have enough. And then the other force is violence. Completely unnecessary violence. So the question is, where is this coming from? In terms of current science, the answers are really not very satisfactory. Some of the answers to the question of violence point to the fact that we are a product of the Darwinian evolution, that we basically came from the animal kingdom, and this is why we have aggression. There are a lot of theories, such as Paul MacLean's triune brain. You know, we have a reptilian brain, we have a mammalian brain. And that reptilian brain has very primitive impulses that, under certain circumstances, can control human behavior. We have, of course, the Darwinian idea of the survival of the fittest. We have the socio-biological theory of the so-called selfish gene. Now, if you look at these theories, they really don't explain the type and the nature of human aggression. Erich Fromm wrote a very interesting book which is called Anatomy of Human Destructiveness, where he points to the fact that the human aggression is fundamentally different from the animal aggression. If we look at nature, animals show aggression because they need food. They're hunting because of seeking food. They might compete for a sexual partner. They might defend their territory. But we don't really find parallels in nature to human aggression. You know, something that would parallel what was happening in the Holocaust, what the Chinese did in Tibet, what has been referred to as the Gulag Archipelago, and so on. So Erich Fromm calls the human aggression malignant aggression in comparison with the kind of aggression that we find in nature. Now then the question is, where does that extra human aggression come from that separates us from the animal in this sense. Now, the initial idea which you can find is that it has something to do with the specificity of human development, that while most of animals require only very short period of parenting, actually some animals are born and they are immediately able to function independently. If you look at turtles or crocodiles, little crocodiles who are being born, they become immediately independent. The mammals have a certain period of dependency, but the human dependency on the maternal organism and on the parents is very, very extended, and it is a complicated interpersonal situation where also in connection with the restrictions of civilization involves a lot of frustration. So this psychodynamic interpretation of this aggression is attributed to dissatisfaction, to traumatic experiences which are specifically human, which animals do not encounter. Freud wrote about the problems that we have because of our animal nature and also living in a human society, that we have to suppress, a lot of our primitive instinctual impulses. He wrote a book called Civilization and Its Discontent, where his basic idea was that we basically, if we were not controlled by society and then by the superego, which is also product of the civilization, but it's mediated through our parents, we would basically indiscriminately kill, steal, act out sexually, and that we are more afraid of the dangers that come from nature, so we come into a human community, and as a toll for it, we have to sacrifice our animal instinct. When Freud was trying to explain aggression, war psychology and so on, he wrote a book which was called Mass Psychology and the Ego, or the Ego Analysis, where he was using the work of a French sociologist, Gustave Le Bon, who wrote a book, The Psychology of the Crowd. And Freud concluded that when humans get into a situation where they operate in a group, something that happens in a revolution, something that happens in a war situation, that they basically surrender their superego and they act as what he calls the id, which means they're controlled by this cauldron of instinctual forces, or that they might surrender their personal superego and identify with the superego of the leader. They identify with the leader. Erich Fromm had also, very interesting idea, which was that because we live in human society, we somehow are not able to fully live our sexuality, that we don't experience full sexual orgasm. With each sexual situation, there is there's jamming of the sexual energy, of the libido in the organism, and it creates a situation of tension, and then this suppressed libido finds various distorted forms of expression that could be neuroses, it could be perversions, but it also could be mass phenomena that involve violence. He wrote a book which was called Mass Psychology of Fascism, which cost him his role as a member of both communist society and psychoanalytic association. Now, these kinds of theories of aggression that we have, I already explained the limitations of the biological interpretation of aggression. The human aggression is different and in a sense is worse than the animal aggression. And the explanations from individual development, various frustrations or traumas from childhood really are very inadequate to explain some of the extremes of human aggression, of sort of individual aggression, cases like the mass murderers, like the Boston Strangler, or in the United States we had Jeffrey Dahmer. People who really are serial killers and kill in a very kind of bestial way. So these theories are really inadequate to explain that intensity and that quality of aggression. They are even less effective to explain group aggression. We had a case of Charlie Manson, who had a whole group of people that committed murders. But then these theories just fail completely when they are supposed to explain violence that takes over a whole nation. Something like Nazism, where people who up to that point were ordinary citizens, suddenly are capable of just unbelievable acts of violence. Now we are in a situation where we are kind of in a crossroad. The violence and greed up to this point were significant forces in human history, but the circumstances were very different. After the worst of battles, within 50 years, nature managed to kind of recycle everything, not only the human victims and the animals, but also, the destruction of inanimate objects which was made. Now we are in a completely different situation by having weapons of mass destruction. We have seen the results of the bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You experienced, or the Ukrainians experienced, the after effects of something that wasn't even an act of war, but was just an accident. The tremendous impact that it has. So we have now weapons of destruction that threaten survival of human species. In the same way, the human greed is threatening our life. We are plundering non-renewable resources, fossil fuels and so on, and we are turning them into pollution. We are doing mass deforestation. We are killing plankton in the ocean, where the forests and the plankton are sources of oxygen, which is something that we need desperately as human beings. We have the destruction of the ozone layer and so on. We have industrial pollution, that ultimately ends up in the oceans. The oceans are vast and deep, but if this kind of activity continues, nature will not be able to absorb this. So we have this combination of this tendency, the greed, and also escalating overpopulation. So we are really facing a situation where both the propensity to violence and this insatiable greed in human nature, has very, very different impact from what it had in the past. So it's somehow imperative to get some deeper understanding of where these forces come from and explore whether we have some means where we can control them, where we can tame them, where we can transform them. I think we all agree that we have a global crisis. We have several doomsday scenarios. Some of them are already really underway. They're already unfolding. And what we see is that the strategies which are being used to cope with the situation actually tend to create more problems than they solve, because they ultimately are extensions of the same strategies which got us into this crisis in the first place. So military interventions, diplomatic, economic interventions simply don't work. And we are on this very dangerous kind of a trajectory. Now, people in the transpersonal circles seem to agree that what we see in the world, all these different critical situations, are really just symptoms of one major crisis, and that crisis actually is a psycho-spiritual crisis. That this is a crisis of consciousness. This is something that is closely connected to the stage of evolution of the human species. And then, unless we undergo some really profound inner transformation on a large scale, that we have very little chance of reversing this dangerous, destructive and self-destructive trend. Now, the question is now, what would be the nature of the transformation that we would have to undergo, and what would be the means that could help us? And I would like to look at some of the observations and the experiences from non-ordinary states. And I would like to say that this is, I don't see it as a panacea, I don't see it as a full explanation, I don't see it as a full recipe for solution. For example, wars and revolutions have very complex causes, which are historical, political, economic, religious, and so on. Yet there is a common denominator. There is a dimension that has been systematically overlooked, which is the psycho-spiritual dimension. Now, if we look into spiritual literature, what we hear again and again, that a human being cannot really reach a sense of fulfillment and inner peace if our efforts are limited to material goals. You see, no matter how much money we have, no matter how much power, no matter how much fame, that in and of itself is not enough to give us satisfaction. So the spiritual teachers emphasize that really, to say it very succinctly, that happiness is an inner job. Happiness is something that has to be achieved through some significant inner work. And if we can change our inner situation, then anything that we have in the material sense would be additional bonus. If we don't change internally, then whatever we achieve in the external world, whatever we will have, will not really bring us fulfillment, satisfaction, happiness, inner peace. Now we see examples around us of people who have already achieved these things, who have enormous riches, billions of dollars, enormous power, fame, and so on, and they are miserable. Many of them suffer. They might end up in addiction. They might commit suicide. Howard Hughes, with his billions of dollars, ended up living in a penthouse in the Bahamas and collecting samples of his urine, emotionally miserable while he was basically swimming in money. And you can find a number of similar kinds of examples. So the question: what would be the nature of the inner transformation that we would have to undergo? Now, yesterday I showed this famous tanka, which is a summary of the teachings of a form of Mahayana Buddhism that you find in Vajrayana in Tibet. I mentioned that there are two major forms of Buddhism. One is the original Buddhism of the Buddha, which is called the small vehicle, or Hinayana. According to this initial teaching of the Buddha, when we are incarnate, when we are part of the material world, we will suffer. Suffering is a necessary attribute of material existence, of incarnation. And his recipe was basically removing ourselves from the samsaric world, as it is called. The term nirvana is derived from the Sanskrit word vata, which means wind. So nirvana means something like evanescence. The image behind it is extinguishing the torches of life. Free ourselves from what the Buddhists called trishna or tanha, which is the thirst of blood and flesh, something that keeps us in the reincarnation cycle. But the basic idea was, if you are incarnate, if you are in the samsaric world, you will suffer. And nirvana was completely outside of the material existence. But then historically, another form of Buddhism, a variation of Buddhism, developed, which is called Mahayana, which means literally the greater, the larger vehicle. And there, the situation changed. There the idea was that we can actually, if not experience nirvana in the samsaric world, we can at least approach it, or we can move towards a nirvanic state, to the extent to which we liberate ourselves, or we are able to reduce three forces within ourselves, which the Tibetans refer to as poisons. Since there are people who were not here yesterday, I will just very briefly describe this particular tanka, this particular image. This is the so-called wheel of becoming, or wheel of life, called sometimes. It is held in the grip of the Lord of Death, and it has 6 segments. These segments are called lokas. They are realms into which we can be reborn, or also realms that can somehow shape our incarnation in the human form. There are also realms that we can visit, we can experience as part of a spiritual practice. We sort of talked about it in some detail yesterday. So this is the realm of gods, Devaloka. It is the realm of the jealous gods, Asura Loka. It is the realm of the hungry ghosts, the Preta Loka, which is actually most directly related to the subject of insatiable greed. They are sort of archetypal figures. They are these creatures with gigantic bellies, enormous appetite, and just with tiny little mouths, sort of size of a pinhole. So they can never get enough. Their appetite is so insatiable, and their capacity to ingesting is so minimal that they are never satisfied. So in some sense, they are the model, of the human inability to find full satisfaction in the material world. On the other side, we can see the realm of wild animals. We can see the realm of humans, and then at the bottom is the Naraka Loka, which is hell. And we looked yesterday at the scene of judgment and so on. So we will now just focus on the middle of that wheel, where there are 3 animals, and these 3 animals represent those 3 poisons that I was talking about. These 3 poisons are ignorance, anger, aggression, violence, and the third one is desire, lust, leading to attachment. It's a very, very, very important term in Buddhism. So in Mahayana Buddhism, the idea is that the quality of our life, the degree to which we can achieve a nirvanic state in the samsaric world, is to the extent to which we manage to reduce the power of these 3 forces in our life. Now, what I would like you to show now is how responsible, supervised work with these holotropic states of consciousness. And again, I'm not talking just about psychedelics. I'm talking about systematic spiritual practice. I'm talking about some of the powerful experiential forms of psychotherapy, some of the rituals of the native cultures and so on, shamanic practices. How responsible work with these holotropic states can, on the one hand, provide deep understanding of the problems that we have individually and collectively, and also how they can help us actually to reduce the functioning of these 3 forces in our life. So we will first look at the element of ignorance. So how can a holotropic state help us in that regard? We already talked about the fact that the holotropic states can take us back to childhood, to infancy. We can not only remember, but we can actually relive various traumatic experiences that happened to us in infancy, in childhood, and that then later complicate our life. They make our life difficult. You can also go further. You can relive your birth, and you realize to what extent the fact that you had that traumatic experience of the passage through the birth canal, how it is still recorded in you and how it complicates your life. You can go into the prenatal life if there were prenatal crises. If you had what we showed as a bad womb, again, this is something that will have strong impact on the quality of your later life, including your adult life. So we can reach a deep understanding of ourselves, something that, originally was the purpose, the goal of psychoanalysis, to go back and to understand our traumatic past, and as a result of it, improve our life. Only the work with holotropic states is a much more powerful tool. We can get into the unconscious much faster, and we can get deeper into the unconscious. So we can learn a lot about ourselves. We talked about the fact that in transpersonal experiences, you can experientially identify with other people, and you understand other people better. You can experience group consciousness. You can identify with members of some other species, and you can get deep insight, deep understanding. Again, I gave examples of the way this can happen. So we can gain deeper knowledge about ourselves and about the material world. I think I mentioned that the work with holotropic states shows us an absolutely new way of learning about the world. The usual understanding of how we learn about the world is we perceive the world through the senses. We use our senses to see what is happening. Then we use our reason. We analyze our observations, and then we reach a synthesis. This is a traditional way of learning. This quite amazing alternative that appears in non-ordinary states is that you can also go into this holotropic state and you identify with different aspects of the world, with people, with animals, even with elements of the botanical nature and so on, and you learn about them by becoming them. When you get a very different and, in a sense, much more profound way of understanding. So that we discover in this that, in some sense, every human being is a microcosm that, in some sense, contains the information about the whole universe. So we can learn about the universe by going outside through our senses, analyzing, synthesizing, or we can go deep inside, and as our process gets deeper and deeper, there a peculiar kind of a flip happens. One of my clients said it's like a Möbius strip. What you can do, you can take a strip of paper, you turn it 180 degrees and you glue it together, and then when you go over the surface, suddenly you are inside, and then you are again outside. So what happens in these states, you go inside and suddenly something happens and you are experiencing a lot of things from the external world, but not through your senses, but through some kind of a representation of the universe inside of your own psyche. You find this as a fundamental tenet in many esoteric systems, certainly in Tantra, wherein you find it in Kabbalah, you find it in the Hermetic tradition and so on, that every human being is a microcosm that contains the whole world. The sentences that are used to describe this is as within, so, or as without, so within, as above, so below. According to the mystical tradition, we are, each of us is an insignificant part of the universe as we are experiencing it everyday life. But then again, the mystics say each of us is really the whole universe. Now, traditionally, when logicians look at it, philosophers or scientists, they say, what a nonsense. It violates Aristotelian logic. Are you a part of the universe, or are you the whole thing? You have to make a decision. Now, we now have very, very interesting scientific approach to this after the discovery of optical holography and hologram, where the holograms have the property, such a property, that the information about the whole is distributed, and you can get it from every part of it. You can take a hologram of something, you cut it in 100 pieces, and of each piece, if you illuminate by laser, you can still get the whole picture. You lose some what's called resolution, some of the fine textures and so on, but you never lose the whole. So now we understand how it is possible, how something can be part and a whole at the same time. And the key, you see, to understanding of this whole thing is that Western science focuses only on what it can measure and weigh. Whereas when we talk about holotropic states, we talk about information. See, I am the whole universe in terms of the fact that I can experience myself as any part of the universe. Obviously, if you put me on the scale, and then you read somewhere some assessment of the amount of matter, of mass that is in the universe, I will be absolutely insignificant part of it. In a similar way, I can experience myself as an elephant. I can get a lot of information about what it is like to be an elephant. Now, that doesn't mean that when I have the experience and you put me on a scale, I will weigh 3 tons. It will be significant, but not 3 tons. Okay. So the statement that each of us is the whole universe is related to our potential to experience ourselves as the whole universe, or every part of the universe, at least potentially. The fact that we are an insignificant part of the universe is related to the world of materialistic science that is interested only in how much things weigh and what their scale is, what their size is. Okay, so we can learn in these holotropic states a lot of information about ourselves and the whole universe through this mechanism. But this is not really what the pig represents. The pig represents a different kind of ignorance. It represents an ignorance which is called in Sanskrit avidya. And it is not lack of knowledge or information about the material world. It has to do with a knowledge of the most fundamental facts, like what is the nature of reality? What is my own nature? Again, I talked about it in some detail yesterday. For example, you find in the Hindu tradition the idea that the world is the way we experience it in our everyday life, in the ordinary state of consciousness, is Maya. It's a very strange kind of an illusion that we really, it is really not what we experience. Some Western philosophers approached that. Immanuel Kant made it very clear that you see, all we can ever know about the world is how it appears to us. All we can know is phenomena. We can never really know the true essence of things, what he calls Dinge an sich, things in and of themselves. And there is for neurologists, for brain researchers, there is this phenomenal problem that has never been solved. What is it, if it is true that our brain somehow accurately reflects reality that's out there, what is it that is capable to change basically chemical changes and electric potentials in our suboccipital cortex into a reasonable facsimile of what is out there. Nobody has also ever even attempted to show how matter could generate consciousness. This is a basic metaphysical assumption of materialistic science, but nobody has ever shown that. So the avidya problem is the problem that we don't really know the deepest nature of reality, and we don't know our own nature. According to Buddhism, there is a principle called anatta. There is no separate self. The idea that we are autonomous, separate beings, that we are, Newtonian objects living in a Newtonian world, is not true. It's true on a certain sense. It's a relative true, but there is a much deeper reality behind it, which we cannot discover by any means of materialistic science, through our senses or through all the extension of our senses that we can use. Now, the holotropic states are specifically designed for discovering this deep nature of reality, the spiritual dimension of reality, the normally invisible dimensions of reality. And you can achieve something that we started calling in transpersonal psychology spiritual intelligence. It's very understandable that the quality of your life depends to a great extent on your intelligence, on your ability to perceive the world correctly and find sort of appropriate ways of responding to the world and so on. Daniel Goleman, several years ago, had a bestseller when he pointed out that the quality of our life also depends on another quality which he called emotional intelligence, which has to do with our capacity to handle adequately interpersonal relationships. Somebody could be brilliant and be completely inept in handling human relationships, and as a result of it be very unhappy, because as human beings we depend critically on other people, and the quality of our life will depend on the quality of relationships that we have, how nourishing, how fulfilling, how supportive, mutually supportive are our relationship with other people. So somebody can be very brilliant but not have this basic interpersonal emotional intelligence. And what I'm talking about is another level of intelligence, which we now call spiritual intelligence, which means operating in the world in such a way that you use the knowledge that comes from this sort of deep self-exploration. That knowledge has been called prajna paramita. We saw yesterday we saw the archetypal image of the goddess that represents this type of wisdom. So the work with non-ordinary states can dispel this kind of an ignorance and lead to a more fulfilling way of being in the world. Now we go to the second poison, which is aggression. So I already mentioned that the current psychodynamic theories are trying to explain the specific aggression, the malignant aggression, from our postnatal life, from the frustrations, the traumatic experiences that we experience in the nuclear family and later. Now, when we work with these holotropic states, when our process reaches the perinatal level, you saw many examples of the perinatal experiences, we discover that there is enormous pocket of aggression that we carry on a deep level. And of course, the amount of it depends on how difficult the birth was, whether it happened within an hour or whether you spent 50 hours in the birth canal. You were born dead and you had to be resuscitated and so on. But this enormous period in which there was a painful, traumatic, frightening experience that has never been adequately processed. You see, if we had an animal, and let's do it as a thought experiment. I don't even want to think about doing it, but you would have an animal, and then you would put the animal, like a cat or a dog, through the kind of experience that the child goes through in the birth canal. You would be kind of strangling them and twisting them and inflicting a lot of pain on them. You would see tremendous storm, enormous response. The animal would be screaming, biting, trying to run away. So you generate enormous amount of difficult energy. And since the fetus is a living being, you have to presume that the similar response happens as well. And you have seen it, particularly in that one slide where you saw the swallowing, the devouring mouth, and then you can see the woman inside turning into an evil being. That abuse coming from outside generated tremendous amount of aggression. Now, the little crying that happens after the child is born is trivial as compared to what it would take to really process adequately, emotionally, what happened during those hours in the birth canal, and also release that amount of pent-up physical energy. Wilhelm Reich, one of the renegades of psychoanalysis, talked about character armor, the enormous amount of blockages that we carry inside ourselves. And the holotropic work shows that a significant amount of that pent-up energy, that armoring, is actually the energy that was generated in the birth canal but never released. So the key here is that we were born anatomically, because we are all sitting here, but we actually were not born emotionally. We have not completed the process. On some level, we have never freed ourselves from the birth canal. We carry it inside. and I'm sure, those of you who did some significant inner experiential work, breath work or some other form, you know that it doesn't take much to get to that, and the enormous amount of difficult feelings that you can come across that really have not been processed. We were born anatomically, but we have not really completed it emotionally. And the people who complete it emotionally in some spiritual practice or some other form, as we saw yesterday, are called twice born, dvija. We talk about being born again. I gave this example of Nicodemus and Jesus, the discussion about being born out of water and spirit and so on. Now, you saw the images of the perinatal matrices, and I mentioned the fact that if you are experiencing the perinatal matrix, you're experiencing that stage of birth that you went through as a fetus, that it also tends to open up the gate into the collective unconscious, either historical or archetypal. And what I notice is that people who are experiencing the second matrix, which in the no-exit situation, they would have images of, or they would identify, for example, with population in totalitarian systems. I gave the example of the Eastern European systems, or communist societies in general, where you get a lot of abuse, and they don't even let you escape from there. Concentration camp would be that kind of situation. So if you are reliving this stage of birth when you are in a no-exit situation, you get a lot of images of violent situations, wars, totalitarian systems, and so on, where you are always on the receiving end. You are the victim. You are the helpless one. You are the downtrodden one. You are what we call in English the underdog. You just identify with the situation of the victim. When you move to the third matrix, suddenly the images change, and the prevailing imagery is revolution. Enough of the oppression. Now we are going to free ourselves, and we are going to breathe again freely, and so on. At the time when people relived the moment of birth, that's where you get images of end of war, victory in a war, victory in a revolution. I worked with a lot of people in Prague who, experienced the Second World War and the end of Second World War, which was, for us in Prague, was not just the end of the war, but there was also, the last 5 days, there was a revolution against the Nazis. So there was a fight in the street where civilians were fighting the Nazis, and the Nazis were doing absolutely bestial things. So then when finally it ended, there was a triumphant sort of a feeling. So those people who experienced it as part of their personal history, as they were being born, suddenly they were getting memories of what it was like when the war ended, and there was this suddenly the feeling of freedom from the Nazis. I described this in my first book, which is called Realms of the Human Unconscious. This interesting thing, this correspondence, you see, between the experiences in the stages of birth and these kinds of images and experiences which were specifically drawn from the collective unconscious. And I got a letter from a psychoanalyst and a journalist from New York City, Lloyd DeMause. That is Lloyd, L-L-O-Y-D, and then D-E-M-A-U-S-E, Lloyd DeMause. He was very excited about my book. He said what I was describing absolutely confirmed his historical research. At a certain point, he became interested in the situation prior to the onset of wars or revolutions. What do the military leaders, what do the demagogues do that they manage to change peaceful civilians overnight into these killing machines? You know, Freud was talking about war. When war comes, the superego is replaced by what he called war superego. The kinds of things that would get you into prison or worse in a peaceful time, you get medals for pillaging, for killing. In many of the wars, actually, the leaders were frequently promising the soldiers when they were taking over a city, they were offering the women in the city as a reward. If the soldiers take the city, they can have all the women. So, you know, raping, killing, pillaging are situations that make you heroes. So this is what he called war superego, which is a peculiar kind of a twist. Now, Lloyd de Moos was really fascinated by this. How is it done? He had a very interesting method of doing it. He went into documents, the speeches that these military leaders gave. In some instances, in later years, he got access to drafts of some of these speeches, where there were certain things that didn't get into it, that were sort of scratched out. In some others, he found what we call doodles, you know, kind of as it was being written, there were little drawings sort of on the side. And by the time we connected, he had analyzed 17 situations of this kind. And he started from Alexander the Great. He went through, you know, Napoleon, Kaiser Wilhelm. He went to Pearl Harbor, you know, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and got to the correspondence between Khrushchev and Kennedy when there was the Cuban Missile Crisis, where the Soviet ships were coming, bringing missiles to Cuba, and there was this head-on confrontation between Khrushchev and Kennedy, where in the letter was that they did not want to get into a situation where they would be like two blind moles meeting in a underground hole and getting involved into death and life struggle. So what he found out is that there was one common denominator in all these situations preceding wars or other kinds of crises, that these leaders were always using metaphors and figures of speech that were drawn from biological birth. The leader was talking about the enemy is closing in. The enemy has his grip on our throat, is squeezing last air out of our lungs. We don't have enough space. You know that Hitler was talking about, wir haben nicht genug Lebensraum. We don't have enough space to live. We have to sort of expand our territory and so on. And then the leader was then promising the solution, again in terminology of the birth process, or metaphors related to the birth process. But there is light on the other side of the tunnel, and I will lead you out of this labyrinth, you know, and we will again sort of breathe freely and so on. I see if I can find some of the statements so we can give it. So a man called Sam Keen, a psychologist, wrote a book which was called Faces of the Enemy, and was also made into a television documentary, where he collected cartoons and posters and caricatures from the time of wars and revolutions, and he found out that if two groups are in a war, you know, the revolutionaries and the existing system, or two nations would be at war, and they portray each other, they use the same kind of stereotypical images. You can find it throughout centuries. And as you will see, I will show you many of these posters from Sam Keen and also from Lloyd de Moss, and we'll juxtapose them with the images that you saw in the slideshow this morning, and you will see that exactly the same images are being used. The other thing is that these posters always generalize. You know, this is what the Americans are like. This is what the Japanese are like, and then you represent them as this horrible dragon, or horrible spider, or horrible snake, and so on. Okay, this is Sam Keen. Okay, can the translators, do you have it in front of you, this same image, or are we synchronized or not?
Yes, we are.
Okay, I'll just try to read it in Russian. It says, symbolism войны как рождение. The first example is Samuel Adams in the American War of Independence. Дитя независимости ныне стремляется родиться. This was the American Revolution. The other one is Kaiser Wilhelm. Monarchию схватили за глотку и ее...
Stan, we can read, we synchronized.
Или же из последних сил защищаться от нападения. Then Nikita Khrushchev в письме с Кеннеди стремился избежать ситуации, когда Советский Союз и Соединенные Штаты встретились бы как два слепых крота в темном подземном ходу и вступили.
Can somebody from the first row tell Stan?
Crisis, the Cuban crisis. Then
Could somebody tell Stan that we can synchronize with him, please?
Посол Японии Curaçao. This was about Pearl Harbor. Рождение ребенка было неизбежно. And then what the interesting thing was here, that the American information service actually managed to they understood this code. They knew what it was about. Now, recently, Osama bin Laden sent a videotape And that said, my prevratím Соединенные Штаты v udušlivý ad. And then the most recent one, and we'll actually see the picture, the caricature, this was Condoleezza Rice, when they asked her what she thinks about this terrible mess in Iraq that the United States created in Iraq. It says, vlivanje. Okay. Vlivanje mi vidí rodové skládky, v которых рождается новый Ближний Восток. Okay? Okay, now Loidomos, I'll let somebody else read it because I have a little difficulties reading it. Or you can see it on the, can you all, even in the back? Okay, so why don't I just let you read it? I'll just say something about it. One of the things that Loidomos mentioned in his early papers was actually the situation with the Hiroshima atom bomb, which is kind of really a tragic kind of thing, where the plane that was carrying the bomb got the name of the mother of the pilot, which was Enola Gay. They gave the nickname to the bomb, Little Boy. This was painted on the atomic bomb. And the agreed upon code, what was signaling to Pentagon the successful detonation of the bomb, was the baby was born. In the Hiroshima, in the Nagasaki bomb, it was a little more remote, but still would not be so difficult to see a fetus behind the name that they painted. They call the bomb the Fat Man. Now, later, I discovered a fascinating paper by Carol Cohn. It's written C-O-H-N, which was called Sex and Death in the intellectual world of the defense intellectuals. The defense intellectuals is a group of people in the United States who get together, in a kind of brainstorming sessions, and they discuss the strategy of nuclear war. You see, the idea of the first strike, the second strike, where do you put your missiles and so on. Our friend Daniel Ellsberg, who published the Pentagon Papers, these were classified papers, and he was working in the Pentagon, and he secretly published it. It was a big sort of a scandal in the United States. And then he later was also doing lectures. It is not in the Pentagon Papers, what I just tell you, but he mentioned it in one of his later lectures, was, for example, that they estimated that if United States and the Soviet Union get into an atomic war, that the first strike would have to be massive and would kill probably 300 million people. And whether countries like Sweden or Denmark would survive would just depend on which direction the wind would be blowing. It's really unbelievable if you think about it, that people who are spinning these kinds of scenarios on both sides, you know, are sort of very esteemed people, powerful people, affluent people, and people who have past life experience get into a psychiatric hospital are put on tranquilizers. Okay. Okay, so can you read this now? Carol Cohn, then she went to a meeting. She is a feminist, and she went to the meeting of these defense intellectuals, and she was fascinated by the amount of birth symbolism which was used throughout the development of the atomic bomb, both the tests and the use, as I just mentioned, the Nagasaki, Hiroshima, and so on. And then she found also a lot of, and they were talking, a lot of sexual symbolism. So I don't know how much time I should give you to read that. The first was the Ernest Lawrence. You see, there are about 8 or 9 situations where the communication about the bombs always involved babies and birth. Are you finished with it? Can I go to the next one? Yeah, okay. Now, at the time when Lloyd de Moos and myself connected and started having exchange, he analyzed 17 of these situations. By now, he has many more. It's really like a common denominator. When there is war coming, what he describes is that what he believes, now that we all carry these perinatal energies in our psyche, and then what happens at a certain time that these energies somehow become available. They start surfacing, and they create a certain tense atmosphere, and that the leader is somebody who is much more in touch with these perinatal energies than others, and he steps out and then formulates this for people. We are threatened. The enemy is closing in, is going to choke us, and so on. And let us go. We'll get them before they get us. And then people respond to it because somehow they are in touch with similar feelings, like the kind of atmosphere which was created after 9/11 in the United States and so on. And then when war starts, then the permission is given to just act out these perinatal forces, and the kinds of things that we saw, people encountering in the inner process when they go through psychospiritual death and rebirth. Suddenly we see in the television. It becomes sort of part of our reality. The tremendous unleashing of violence, of the sexual abuse, the scatology, you know, the rotting corpses and the destroyed cities and so on. So that whole situation is just enacted in everyday world. So what he believed is that the military leader is not a kind of a big father figure that Freud would see, but Lloyd de Moor said more like a garbage collector, you know, who sort of carries these kinds of difficult energies and has them more available than others, and comes out and sort of puts it out and manages somehow to mobilize people to this kind of behavior. Now the open question remains, if that's true, what causes that situation in which the perinatal energies become more available? And I have a very close friend whom I mentioned, you saw actually in the slides, Rick Tarnas, who is studied Harvard. At Harvard, he's a brilliant psychologist, and then 30 years ago became interested in really serious astrology, not the kind of thing that you read in daily newspapers, and spent 30 years studying human history. And then several months ago, he released a book which is called Cosmos and Psyche, where he shows that throughout history, times of revolutions and wars systematically coincide with certain planetary transits. It's always Saturn, Pluto, Mars, throughout centuries. And he shows a lot of other situations. For example, major scientific breakthroughs, again, happen in situations where there are significant Uranus transits and so on. So you would have to read the book. He also, at the beginning, gives a very intelligent discussion of archetypes. You have to understand archetypal psychology to understand the kind of astrology that Rick is doing. So the work with holotropic states gives us, insights into where deeper sources of aggression are in the psyche than just what happened to us in childhood. There's this enormous pocket of aggression that we find on the perinatal level, and then there are deeper sources which are in the archetypal world. There are sort of archetypal figures representing violence. There are archetypal motifs that represent violence. For example, Carl Gustav Jung, who brought the idea of archetypes into psychology. When Rick talks about archetypes, he shows that they can be seen from three different perspectives. You can see them in a kind of a Homeric way when you think about them as deities, you know, Mars, Venus, Pluto, and so on. You can look at them as philosophical principles, the Platonic ideas, Platonic forms, and you can see them also as psychological principles, the way Carl Gustav Jung wrote. And Jung, after discovering synchronicity and publishing after 20 years of studying synchronicities, this wonderful essay called Synchronicity and a Causal Connecting Principle. He started seeing the archetypes as not something that's inside of the brain, but as sort of cosmic organizing principles that have influence on on us individually, but also shape world events. And for example, when he was working with patients from Germany before the Second World War, he found out that they were surfacing in their dreams elements of an archetypal motif, which is called in Nordic mythology Ragnarok. It's the last battle. It's the Götterdämmerung, the doom or the twilight of the gods. And he concluded from that there is catastrophe coming that's going to take over Germany, and that ultimately it will be self-destructive, because that is the nature of the archetype. So in Jungian psychology, war has a lot to do with the archetypal world as well. There's actually a wonderful book that I really recommend, which is written by Jim Hillman, one of the greatest living Jungians, which is called The Terrible Beauty of War, when he talks about the fact how these archetypal forces take over and they sort of govern, people's behavior, and how people get drawn into war. Okay, so this is the issue of the violence, the second poison, the aggression. So we can not only find deeper sources of violence using holotropic states, but we also discover therapeutic mechanisms that can reach that level and can bring that material in a supportive situation with the proper kind of understanding, can bring this material into consciousness and transform it. We can relive our birth. We can express in a controlled situation the aggression which is associated with it, and if we properly integrate that situation, the level of aggressive impulses or proneness, disposition for aggression is significantly reduced. It leads to feelings of compassion and so on. Now we can, Volodya, how are we doing with time? Is Volodya here?
1 hour for...
What?
1 hour for completing. 1 hour.
Before we start doing the discussion. Okay. So we look at the third poison now, which is desire, which is lust, which ultimately is also greed, something that's related to what the Buddhists call attachment. Now, again, what is the current approach of psychology? In Freud, you will find out that if you are greedy, it very likely has something to do with the fact that your process of nursing was not satisfactory. You did not get enough oral satisfaction, and as you grow up, this unfulfilled need, oral need, gets what he calls sublimated, and it becomes like a tendency, you see, to sort of devour, get everything under your control. Sort of instead of the maternal nourishment that you were supposed to get, now you are sort of projecting it on all kinds of other things. If the object of your greed is money, then according to Freud's famous formula, it has something to do with anal impulses. It has to do with the Freudian idea that gold and money has something to do with feces and so on. And then withholding and letting go is related to how you deal with money and so on. And if it's a greed that takes a sexual form, like a sexual addiction, you would have a phallic fixation, things that happened at the time of, let's say, the age of 4, when you were experiencing the Oedipal triangle. Now again, this is a very, superficial, not very convincing model to describe the dimensions of human greed. Now, if we work with non-ordinary states, when you get to the perinatal level, you will discover that you carry within yourself this incomplete, I would say, incomplete gestalt of birth. So that on some level, you still experience yourself as if you were confined in the birth canal. When we do the breath work, in some instances, all it takes is hour and a half of breathing, and some people would be experiencing themselves as being actually caught in the birth canal. That means that depending how far that material is from consciousness, it will color that person's experience of the world, usually leading to sense of and besides creating symptoms like claustrophobia and so on, or depression, it leads to a general sense of sort of dissatisfaction and a tendency to become a victim. Once you are under the influence of the third matrix, you have the situation where you feel uncomfortable. The discomfort can take many different forms. I don't look the right way, I don't have the right kind of money, I don't have the good kind of respect from people, I don't have the right kind of car, I don't have enough fame, and so on. And then our fantasy creates some situation in the future which would correct that situation. If I just could make $100,000, I would not feel as miserable as I feel. Or if I become a senator or a famous person of some kind, if I would become a doctor, my world would change. This is called in existential philosophy auto-projecting, self-projecting, which means feeling dissatisfaction with one's current situation and seeing in one's fantasy some situation that will correct it. Now this sets us on a kind of a linear trajectory. Now we are going to create that situation that's going to change our life. Now, then we go, fight, we find obstacles, we're trying to overcome obstacles, we're fighting enemies, competing and so on. And then one of two things can happen. One is that we don't achieve the goal, and we continue feeling miserable to different degrees, and we have the feeling that we feel that way because we did not reach the corrective situation. The other alternative is that we get there. You get your $100,000. You get your medical degree. You become the senator or whatever you want it to be, and you wake up in the morning and nothing has changed. So you say, something went wrong, Most people don't say, this happened because I have the wrong kind of strategy. They say, well, the goal was not ambitious enough. If I had $200,000, that would make a difference. Or if I would have a PhD on top of it, that would make a difference. And of course you find out that doesn't do it either. And we have people around who have billions of dollars, and it's not enough. I went to a special kind of a training that was given by a man whom you probably know, Werner Erhard, because he spent some time in Moscow. And there were some of us who were invited, whom he wanted to show his so-called S training. I don't think he's doing it anymore. But one of the interesting things he said was, when psychologists are studying rats, behaviorists are studying rats, what they do, they create a labyrinth, and then at the end of some of the corridors they put cheese, and at the end of some of the corridors they don't put cheese. And he said your average rat will learn very quickly to get only to the end of the corridors when there is some cheese. Only people are not like that. We have learned already that when we have achieved some goals from which we expected a lot, nothing really changed that significantly. I had actually a person who had a big goal, worked 20 years, expected tremendous things, and the next morning after achieving it got into a deep depression. Joseph Campbell has this inimitable sort of Irish humor. He says, it is really like getting to the top of the ladder and finding that it was against the wrong wall. So what's basically happening, you see, that we have this, on a deeper level, we have this memory of being stuck in the birth canal, and the sense that something better is in the future. We have to sort of get to a different situation. It's not okay where we are. And then when we become adults, this operates in our unconscious, and it becomes translated into goals. Certain things from which we expect the kind of feelings that we would have if we complete birth. And because it's not happening on the inner plane, it doesn't make much difference. We can go through life chasing constantly some better future, preparing ourselves for the time when we start really living fully, because we don't have the conditions that we consider necessary for happiness. So people who get in touch with this pattern, the regression goes to the level they realize that their life has been inauthentic. Now, you can realize it to a certain extent in connection with postnatal experiences. You can realize that a lot of the things that don't work in your life are results of something that happened in your childhood, that your behavior in certain sectors of your life was inauthentic because you were still acting out something from the past, and it didn't have the full relevance for the present. But once you get to the perinatal level, suddenly you have a sense that your entire life strategy has been inauthentic because you were expecting from what you were doing something that those actions couldn't give you. So the kinds of images that I heard from my clients was, I see that my life up to this point was like a treadmill. You see, the image is like the hamster in this little rotating wheel, sort of constantly chasing something in the future and never getting it. Or, another image that you sometimes see is, like you're sitting on a donkey and you have a little rod, and on it is a carrot, and the carrot becomes something that sort of making the donkey to go forward, but it's really never getting the carrot. Other people talk about, my life has been like a rat race, sort of, for example, people making a lot of money and realizing that they were making a lot of money, but the amount of money was not really changing very much how happy they felt. I would have to say, once you get beyond a certain level, if we are talking about countries in Africa where there is famine, people don't know if they get their dinner, people don't have a place to stay. this is something very different. But we are in a situation where we are fairly comfortable. I mean, we get our dinner, we have a place to stay. Many of us have cars to get around and so on. Once you get to that level, the additional material possessions very unlikely will change anything. Beyond that, the work has to be done internally. So then, when people then go inside and they complete this, they have the experience of being born, having the experience of the second birth, emerging and realizing that they are free on a very deep level. They suddenly appreciate what they have in a much more profound way. They can enjoy really life. I talked about joie de vivre, or élan vital, or we call it zest, and so on. You suddenly realize that with what you have, you can be much happier than you were before. Before this pattern is resolved, the attention is more on what we are missing, what we should have, rather than appreciation of what we have. Now, there's a tendency also for the strategy of life to change. Before it was a linear, you see, this is the goal, this is where I need to go, and then I'm going to fight the enemies, I'm going to overcome the obstacles. And people who have completed this, life would become more like martial arts. You see, let me see where the energies are going. How do I fit there? Oh, this way. You see, and then you're willing to change your course. Ramdas has another interesting image for this. He said, unfortunately, cannot do it because he's now paralyzed half of his body. But he says, look, your life becomes more like surfing. When you are surfing, you don't say, now I'm going left. You have to go where the wave is going, and then change your movements. Now, people who move in the direction of this strategy, they find something very interesting. This is called the watercourse way. Taoism is very much about it. This is called Wu Wei, the doing by being. A lot of it's using the metaphor of water, that has that adaptability and so on. People have suddenly the feeling that they achieve more than when they were trying hard, and that somehow the world starts cooperating. Synchronicities happen. They want to do something and don't have any money, and suddenly somebody shows up and offers them the money. Or you need an information, and suddenly the book appears and you get the right kind of information. But what is even more important is that the activities that you are doing now are satisfying not just you, but are somehow doing something good for other people. You are part of a larger, larger movement. That linear strategy, which I described before, is competitive. It's exclusive. You get something at the expense of others. You get something that others don't get. Competition. It's a big force in the capitalist world. And there are now some kind of enlightened businessmen and so on who started running the companies in a very, very different way, including an additional dimension, maybe taking concerns about ecological necessities and so on. I have in the book, When the Impossible Happens, examples of that, including the example when I, after the liberation of, it had sort of two stages. When perestroika happened, glasnost, those of us who were running the International Transpersonal Association were always missing people from Eastern countries, who couldn't get the permission to come, they didn't have the currency to come and so on. We always felt, this is a transpersonal association, this could bring people together. And then when perestroika and glasnost happened, we said, well, let's do it in Russia. And Christina and I came here, and we were exploring it, but things just were not coming together. And then this revolution happened in Prague, so let's do it in Prague. I came to Prague. Now, I hadn't been there, for 20 years. I couldn't go back. And I had no contact with my friends because it would have been difficult for them. So I had no idea about the conditions and so on. So where do I start? I was sitting in my mother's apartment for 10 minutes, and the bell was ringing. A friend of mine, old friend of mine, Tomáš Dostal, we actually sat for each other's session. He's a psychiatrist in the past. Came, and he said, I heard that you were coming, so I'm coming to say hello. And he said, oh, by the way, as I was walking out of my apartment, the telephone rang, and it was Ivan Havel, who is the brother of the president. We are schoolmates, we are, all good friends, and Ivan Havel knew that we were friends, and he wanted your address or telephone number, because they just had the lecture from Vasily Nalimov, and Vasily Nalimov mentioned your work. We wrote books that had almost the same title, Realms of the Unconscious. Vasily and mine was the Realms of the Human Unconscious. And so Vasily was talking. Ivan Havel is a scientist who works in artificial intelligence, and he was running an underground group of people related to the university who were interested in the new paradigm thinking, in transpersonal psychology. And now Vasily told them about me, so they say, can we somehow get in touch with Stan Grof? And Tomáš says, well, actually he's in Prague. I am just on my way to see him. So within 10 minutes, I had the connection for the International Transpersonal Association with a group of scientists who were vitally interested in having a conference like that. The idea that they could see and meet Rupert Sheldrake and David Bohm and Karl Pribram was just exciting for them. And at the same time, he was the brother of Václav Havel, and so the conference then was happening under the aegis of Václav Havel. Unfortunately, Václav Havel couldn't address the conference because just that day Czechoslovakia was falling apart, and they had a very stormy meeting in the parliament until 3 o'clock in the morning, sort of this, dealing with this crisis. But then we learned sort of when we wanted to do something, when these kinds of synchronicities started happening, we had the sense that this is an energy that would be worth following. Okay, so there's a significant reduction of this greed, of this, this tendency to always have more. But then there is an even deeper, which I just will touch upon, just very, very, the much deeper source of this human dissatisfaction. And I like to use Ken Wilber's concept, which he has in his book called the Atman Project. The basic idea, he uses perennial philosophy, the basic idea there is that our deepest nature is divine. It's the idea we are not nama rupa, we are not body ego, we are not name and shape. Our deepest nature is Atman Brahman, each of us. And of course we lose that awareness, we lose that in the process of incarnation, but not completely. There is like a deep intimation of us that we should be something much, much bigger than we actually are in the role into which we are put. And then we are trying, you see, to basically achieve our divinity through the limitations of the physical body and the world, which of course becomes impossible. So there's surrogates. This is what he calls Atman project. So we go after money, we go after possession, after fame, and so on. And there's only one way that this can be really saturated. This is the deepest source of that, which is when in a non-ordinary state of consciousness, you have the experience of identification with the creative principle. This is what you find in the Upanishads when they ask the question, who are you? Who am I? Who are you? And the Sanskrit answer is Tattvam Asi. This, thou art that, which really means your true nature is divine. Teilhard de Chardin said, we are not human beings having spiritual experiences. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. So ultimately that satisfaction comes from this deep experience of our own divinity, and from that we can then return into our everyday life and play the role, whichever role we have in this particular incarnation, but we have that larger metaframe, or larger, deeper understanding of the nature of reality and also our true nature, which helps us significantly to deal with difficulties in life. I'm getting all kinds of signals. I'm now really exhausted. I've exhausted my time. So this is the time to answer the questions, yeah?
We have 20 minutes more. 20 minutes more.
20 minutes for questions.
20 minutes for slideshow. If you want to continue with slideshow.
Oh, we have we have the
20 minutes.
we have the promised cartoons, of course, yeah. So. Okay, we can go quite quickly through that. I will always give you little vignettes, the kind of images that you saw, which people drew when they relived birth in their psychedelic sessions or in their holotropic sessions, or sometimes in spontaneous episodes, and then we will compare, how this is used in political propaganda. And I mentioned before that there are two things which happened in this kind of demagogy. One is the statement is made about the whole nation. This is what the Russians are like. Okay, this is what the Americans. Well, there's nothing like your archetypal American. I mean, if you come to Texas, it's a different country than if you come to California, and New England is something else. And within each of those states, there are good people and there are miserable people. To say this is what the Americans are like simply doesn't work. But somehow in this, hysteria, this war hysteria, somehow it works. And the other thing is then there is a stereotypical set of archetypal motifs that are used to portray the enemy, okay? The basic idea, and Sam Keen talked about it, Lloyd DeMoss talked about it, I talk about it, is that what is happening in the situation, that we have a shadow, what Jung called shadow. We carry a lot of difficult material, which we don't recognize, we don't acknowledge, we don't do inner work on, but we project it. We project the shadow individually in our individual behavior, but we also can project it on a national scale. Like Bush has this thing, we are the warriors of life. He talks with God, and God is on his side, and then there's the axis of evil. The bad guys are all all out there. There's no recognition that there was any kind of contribution, historical contribution to the whole situation in the Middle East. And so not sort of recognizing, our own role in that. And yet, in a situation where there is this hysteria, it worked on many people. Lloyd de Moos had another interesting thing. He said, we all learned the Freudian sexual symbolism. We cannot easily be fooled now by sexual symbols, let's say used in advertising and so on. We can decode it. And he said, in the same way, we should use the perinatal symbolism, so that when you have a leader who tells you the enemy is closing in, is choking us and so on, you say, well, where's the mattress? The guy should lie down and do a little more work, rather than seeing it as a justifiable reason to start a war. So this was Lloyd de Moos's conclusion. So here just some examples how frequently these images of fetuses are used in political cartoons. This was Bush's fear, old Bush. Carter, as a fetus. And now we have the motif of the engulfment, of the devouring, either the whirlpool or some kind of monster swallowing us. You see another whirlpool. Swallowing, another swallowing. Okay, now there are these political crises, time of crisis. Now this is, comes pretty close, as you can see. Now this is when there was the crisis when OPEC suddenly increased the price of oil, and on the car it says American lifestyle, going into a tunnel, being swallowed. Are the translators translating for you the things? This is Bush saying, see, we have got a handle on terrorism. This is when Bush started the war with Iraq, against or without the consent of United Nations, and then sort of trying to bring United Nations to help him with his mess. So this is the situation where the Korean 747 was shot down. So this shows the Russian bear swallowing the airplane. Iran nukes. Yeah. This is in Lebanon. Anyone up there happens to spot a light at the end of the tunnel. This is Bush. This is the way out of the tunnel, and it happens to the shape of Vietnam. A lot of people in the United States compare Iraq and Vietnam. So far, so good. This is Bush. You see entering the labyrinth. I talked about Steppenwolf, about the magic theater and so on. You're here. Another one, you're here. Now, a dragon is a typical, this is from a psychedelic session, it's a very typical image, an experience in psychedelic sessions when it represents the elemental forces in birth. And you can, of course, you can find it in fairy tales when the hero goes and kills the dragon, and the dragon usually guards a treasure, which is interpreted as the inner treasure, the transcendental meaning, and then also a woman. So there's a union with the feminine when you come through birth. Now, notice the size of this dragon. You know, he is crushing people in these paws. This is another one. This is when Great Britain's losing Hong Kong, the Chinese dragon swallowing Hong Kong. This is communism represented as a dragon, Mother's crusade for victory over communism. Now, we even haven't seen this spider. I mean, the spider is a very common image. We have seen this one from a holotropic session. We saw this one. We saw this from a holotropic session. This one from a psychedelic session. And this is Saddam Hussein as a spider. Arachnophobia, set of arachnophobia. Another arachnophobia. Now this is from a Soviet, during the American capitalist as a spider bringing atomic weapons into Western Europe. Again, American capitalist as a spider. I talked about this one, the female genital as a prison, as a torture chamber, something that crushes, the crushing. This is the Vice Titans. The Vice is, is it being translated? It's an instrument where you can increase the pressure, you can squeeze things. The screw tightens. Now the squeeze really starts. This is Reagan. The grip on Lithuania. Crushed by credit. Jimmy Carter in financial trouble. Yeah. Now another possibility is the experience of the contractions as something like an octopus. Let's say if you were a diver, you would threatening Europe in the form of an octopus. This is communism as an octopus. This is Bin Laden as an octopus. This is Japan threatening Indonesia, the Indonesian islands, in the form of an octopus. Jimmy Carter again. This is Slobodan Milosevic taking over Yugoslavia as an octopus. Zionism as an octopus. Uncle Sam as America, United States as an octopus. You can see Great Britain. I mean, you can, this can be applied to any nation that you don't like. Now here we see, that picture that we had in the slideshow, and here is the corresponding picture. Only instead of the predatory birds, you have snakes, which of course are again powerful perinatal symbols. But you can see that the predatory birds are also frequently used. Now this is the experience of the second matrix as a snake pit, like being surrounded by these snakes. On the one hand is the imminence of death, but the snake, the viper, is also a symbol of initiation. In Pompeii, if you have seen the Via Dei Mystery, there are fantastic frescoes representing the Dionysian initiation, and the beginning of it is through a bite of a viper. So this is also beginning of an initiatory process, in a sense, if you carry it through. But it's a snake pit. It's another snake. We saw this one, python, and I think we might not have seen this one. This is what you saw. It's just a selection. I've many more. This is the conflict between the Communist Party and the Nazis before the Second World War. And this is Genosse hilf mit, gemeinsam bezwingen wir sie. Comrade, help, together we will defeat them. Stamp them out. It's a great one. It specifically talks about, I think we are in a snake pit. Uncle Sam surrounded by all these problems in the Middle East. The conflict between Pakistan and India. Indira Gandhi as a snake, the conflict with the Sikhs. Marshal Tito. It was Bismarck. This was the Minister of Energy when there was energy crisis. This is a great one. This is Theodore Roosevelt and his political enemies, and he's represented as a little Hercules, who, according to Greek mythology, was attacked. Hera sent snakes on him, and he was able to defeat them. Foreign oil, represented as a snake. German military power swallowing the world. Another Reagan. These captions are Lloyd de Moses. This is from Lloyd de Moses' book. Now you can see this is a Nazi propaganda where you can see the so-called powers of the Axis defeating the Allies. And this is that cartoon of Condoleezza Rice where she talked about the crisis, what was happening in the Middle East as being birth pangs of the new Middle East. Now we talked about this connection between the development of atomic bombs and pregnancy. By the way, what I was talking about today is described in detail in my books, so you can get all those quotes and many others. It's in several places. So this is a limited nuclear war. Okay. Now, Saddam Hussein pregnant with atomic weapons. This is the sign for atom that he has on his belly. Saddam Hussein sitting on the atomic egg. Actually, Saddam Hussein actually as a bad mother nursing chemical weapons. And this is even a more fantastic one, showing him as somebody who is gagging and constricting children. And here is the opposite. This is a call for leadership as basically calling for the way out of the tunnel. This is from the breathwork, the experience of emerging victoriously from the birth canal, and this is Clinton's political victory. Now this is a little more complicated one. I have a whole series, it's a comic strip by Robert Crumb, and this is a tremendous parallel between that and this cartoon. But what this is about, this is Paula Jones, who accused Clinton of sexual harassment, and here, you can see that she put him in a toilet, and then he he goes through this whole system, and then he's emerging, and in Crumb's comic, Pete the plumber, the hero, ends up, in an ecstatic state. Clinton here ends up more as a kind of a beaten up fetus. Now this is also another interesting idea that Lloyd Moss had. He found that the military marches have something to do with the dual pulse rate, the pulse of the fetus and the pulse of the mother. And here he was showing that the first known military banner was used in ancient Egypt, and it was actually the dried placenta and umbilical cord of the pharaoh. This was the first, so it brings a sense of belonging and comfort, unity and so on. I think that's probably it. This is, I teach in Santa Barbara, one of the places I teach is Santa Barbara, and this was adult education, and I showed the slideshow that I showed today, and there was one of these ladies there said, "Oh, now I understand the pictures that my 16-year-old daughter is drawing," and then she sent me one of these pictures where you can see the connection between, this is Hitler with the Heil Hitler greeting coming out of the vagina. Okay, I think this is the last picture that I have. Okay, so I think we used all our time. So thanks again for your patience. And, it's a real pleasure to be here.
Несколько вопросов о холотропной подходе, холотропном дыхании. Насколько эффективно холотроп, это на сленге холотропное дыхание при проблемах? Первое – фобии, второе – нарушение речи, и третье – допустим ли диагноз нервное истощение? Нервное истощение.
Okay, so the question is about the phobia and whether it's could be useful to use holotropy breathwork with phobias and nervous exhaustion and breakdowns.
phobias. Actually, there is a whole chapter in my book, which is called Psychology of the Future, which is called Architecture of Emotional and Psychosomatic Disorders, that shows you how you can understand phobias in a completely new way if you don't think about them only in terms of something that originated postnatally, but you bring in the perinatal level and then, of course, frequently the transpersonal level in addition. So, for example, claustrophobia is really closely related to, it has what I call a coax system, which is a system of experiences, postnatal experiences, but then the deeper core of that is the memory of the situation where the uterus is closing in. So when that memory starts coming close to the surface, the person has the feeling that things are sort of closing in, and it's usually caused by, being in a subway where there's a lot of people, or into a room without windows, or in an elevator, some situation that kind of resembles that, and they have to get out of it because it starts bringing up their own material. The fear is not of the space that the person is in. The fear is related to the memory of birth and some later memories that cause confinement. Thanatophobia, for example, is related again as a very, very deep core on the perinatal level, where life is threatened. So when you start reliving birth, the feelings of the vital threat are still there, and because you don't know that you are dealing with somebody that already happened, you start projecting it on the present situation. Something horrible is happening to me. I'm going to get a stroke, and the people go to doctors, and of course there's usually nothing is found, and sometimes they seek second opinion, and they frequently end up with a psychiatrist because they become a problem for medical personnel, because they insist there has to be something strong with them, and the medical profession is not finding anything. There are the phobias of large animals, for example, are related to that experience of engulfment. If you start getting in touch with the memory of being swallowed, which we have seen, and then you see some large animal, the idea is that it could come from that particular animal. With some of the phobias you have to know the symbolism. There is arachnophobia, that we talked about. This phobia of snakes, which of course Freud saw as a sexual fear, but on a deeper level it is the perinatal fear. So you get new understanding, and if you want to read that chapter, I go one phobia after another, all phobias that I have had the chance to work with, and where we found the roots, and also on which level they can be resolved. The second one, that's a little more complicated. You see, disturbance of speech, because there you have to have a solid neurological examination. There could be something organically wrong, but there are certain situations which are psychogenic, like what we call stammering or stuttering, that even psychoanalysis considers to be psychosomatic, and there you can find typically the sources, and in a combination with body work you might able to alleviate that kind of a problem.
And the good one about nerve exhaustion.
Yeah, the nervous exhaustion, it's a little kind of a nebulous term. I would have to get a little better kind of a psychiatric diagnosis for that. if it means that you feel fatigue, like chronic fatigue. This is a very, very complex problem in medicine. Physicians argue if it exists at all, this chronic fatigue syndrome. Some people believe that it belongs into the area of depression. Other people believe there is Lyme disease behind it, and so on.
Есть еще несколько вопросов о холотропном дыхании.
There are also several other questions about holotropic breath work. Whether one can practice holotropic breath work on one's own, what is the method of holotropic breath work, and whether it is detrimental to health.
You cannot give it as a general permission. You don't know where people are. There are people who have a lot of problems, people who might be borderline, where doing something like this can bring a material that without support they really cannot work through. It also doesn't work so well because in some sense you have to be your own sitter. Part of you has to stay sort of in control, whereas the idea in breathwork is to let go, to surrender to the process, sort of follow the inner guidance. The other thing is many people have the experience of abandonment in childhood. They didn't have enough of a support, and then the holotropic breathwork takes you there, and you realize that you're alone again. So nothing has changed, and so if you then have somebody there with whom you have good relationship, that provides what we call corrective experience. The other reason why it doesn't make sense to do it individually on your own is because sometimes you need good body work to really reach a clean completion, and of course you cannot do easily body work on yourself. So, if you then have done a lot of these sessions under supervision and you know where you are, then it's a different story. But it would be very irresponsible to give a kind of a green light to say, like what Leary was saying, turn on, tune in, drop out, like anybody can do it. It's very irresponsible to answer that question that way.
What is the essence of holotropic breathwork? Isn't it dangerous?
Well, dangerous in what sense? We have pretty strict contraindications, which are physical contraindications. We make sure that people don't have serious cardiovascular problems. For example, we would be concerned about somebody who has high blood pressure, somebody who has arteriosclerosis, somebody who had a history of heart problems, somebody who has aneurysm and so on. So those are all kinds of physical contraindications. We would be very careful in pregnant women, particularly if it's a later stage of pregnancy, because as you saw, women who are reliving birth can also experiencing themselves as delivering, and it involves real contractions of the uterus. It's not just in people's head. And so it involves contractions, and this could really cause, a trigger an abortion. We have seen women who, after a powerful session like this, started menstruating in the middle of their cycle. So then there's a very complicated question of the emotional contraindications. You see, in principle, it is possible to use holotropic work as therapy, with fairly difficult conditions. We have used it to facilitate the process in people who would be traditionally considered psychotic and so on. The importance here, the important emphasis is on the context. You see, if we do a workshop, weekend workshop, we have to be really careful. We ask people not to come if they have history of psychiatric hospitalization or some serious problems, not because it would not be possible to work with them, but because we simply don't have the conditions. You know, we are renting a place and we are supposed to be out of there at 5 o'clock, and we might be in the middle of some really intense process, and what do you do? People have, you know, airplane tickets and so on. Although we have now, you know, people, trained people in many cities, and we like to do the public workshops in places where we have actually trained facilitators who can provide background and so on. But if you have, which unfortunately isn't available in the United States, there were several efforts to do it, but we don't have them. Facility where people could, with some serious problems, could go, then you can do the holotropic breath work. But that you have to have 24-hour supervision and, you know, constant support for people. If you have a situation where you have to do the session in several hours and reach a good closure, you really don't want to work with people who have serious problems.
The next question is about where to find certified holotropic breath workers. Is there any website where you can find certified people with pictures, etc., to be sure
Then,
that they are really certified?
we have a list of trained facilitators.
И следующий вопрос был о том, где найти сертифицированных специалистов по холотропному дыханию. Есть ли такой сайт, где был бы реестр этих тренеров с их фотографиями для защиты от мошенников?
Okay, we have a list of facilitators, and actually Vladimir made a website for me for this visit, and I didn't have time to really explore it in detail, but I finished that there is a link, that there is actually
two links, both for transpersonal training and for Kyla Taylor International Association.
For the International Association of Holotropic Breathwork, and of course Volodya is the, you know, is somebody who is conducting a training for certified facilitators. So, and he's also doing workshops, and he can. If you are from other places, I'm sure he can give you, because he has worked with a lot of people, he can give you some good advice where to go if you want to attend a workshop. I wouldn't be the expert for, you know, places in Russia where you could get good guidance or good support. Yeah, please.
Я немножко добавлю, потому что во Владивостоке
I would add that we have a certified
Татьяна Белявская,
holotropic breathwork Tatiana Belявskaya at Kiev, Tatiana Musatova at Moscow I, and so far the only certified holotropic breathwork trainers. But there's a large group at Bulgaria and a large group at Russia. They're very close to end their training education. And I think that in the future year we'll have at least 20 people of certified holotropic breathwork facilitators.
Experience, actually, and about your attitude towards water birth, Игорь Черковский, etc., home birth. Целая группа вопросов о водных домашних родах, об Игоре Черковском.
Well, I would sort of answer the question in a little broader way, because I think it's very interesting. The general idea in medicine today is you approach birth as something that involves body mechanics. You are just considered to cover somehow the somatic part. You know, you check the blood groups, and we used to, I don't know what you do here, we used to put silver nitrate in the eyes, and you know, you have to do certain basic things to find that the baby is okay. This work has shown that this is not just something that involves the body, but that the way the birth is run has a profound impact on the whole psychological life of the person. And that is not a common knowledge in obstetrics. But it led to the founding of Association of Pre- and Perinatal Psychology, which now has an international meetings as well as national meetings in the United States, where midwives, obstetricians come together with people who do this kind of work, and they are learning from each other. So it's now obvious that it makes a big difference how you structure the birth. There's a tremendous movement in California for women who don't want to deliver in the hospital, to be exposed to that situation, the bright light, that, you know, the paging, the medical students, and so on. And at the same time, they want to have the benefit of modern medicine. So they found doctors who would be backing them. There are actually some hospitals that respond to that, and they create rooms which are adjacent to the hospital, where the woman can create her own setting, and if there is a problem, within 5 minutes she can be in the operation room. And you know, this, if let's say 5% of the deliveries require some real medical intervention, it doesn't seem to make sense to run 100% of the deliveries as emergencies. Expose women to a hospital setting which we have so deeply associated with pain, with disease, you know, with operations and so on. And you know, I live in California, and not just in California, but in the Bay Area, you know, where transpersonal psychology began and so on. And so a lot of women actually arrange their deliveries so that it's a tribal delivery. They would be drumming and chanting and so on. So there are situations where you can create your own environment, and at the same time really use the benefit of modern medicine. So there are certainly tremendous implications, and I believe that good handling of the delivery has a tremendous psychological impact. Now the first, besides things like natural childbirth and good preparation, the first major breakthrough was Le Boyer, Frederic Le Boyer from Paris, who introduced the idea of non-violent birth. When after birth he had a little bassinet with water, and he did this very interesting massage on the baby. I went to a lecture that he gave in Chicago, where he was showing some of the first showing in the United States of the movie, and I got fascinated by what he was doing to the head. So I came to him and I asked him, what are you doing there? And he said, I'll show you. This family had a billiard table, and so I ended up lying on the billiard table, and he was showing me on my head what he was doing, and it took me right back to my prenatal experiences of being in an advanced stage of this prenatal life. When the mother is moving, you get these very kind of gentle, tactile sensations. And something similar now has been developed into craniosacral therapy. So he somehow intuitively managed to recreate a situation which becomes very reassuring for the child. Unfortunately, he himself had tremendous problems. His birth lasted 40 hours. He very much identified with the second matrix and so on. And he basically sort of, once he got the baby, it was a sacred act between him and the baby at the expense of the mother frequently. And there are other people like Michel Audin, another Parisian, who get that, the idea from Le Boyer, but develop it in a more organic way, when he would include the husband and the mother and so on. And then, of course, there is Igor Tchaikovsky, which is a very revolutionary idea. You just do it underwater. I read that it's likely that that in ancient times that in some parts of the world women actually delivered in water, because birth means a lot of blood that attracts predators and so on, and like the cats are, and the big cats are afraid of water and so on. Now, what happens here? I was amazed when I experienced the first water birth, because they didn't tell me in the medical school that the baby could exist underwater for 20 minutes, still getting the oxygen from the placenta. Now, this is extremely important, because what happens, you see, the birth becomes an extremely revolutionary, dramatic, kind of traumatic transition to come from the birth canal and suddenly have to breathe and rebuild your anatomy and so on. Whereas if the child is born into water, and let's say goes to the mother's body and gets this gentle massage, it's like telling the baby in a language that the baby understands. Nothing irreversible happens. Things got tough there for a while, but now you are in that kind of environment. Particularly if it was a good womb, it was a good pregnancy, you're back. Things are okay again. And so it's a long way. Long time. 15 minutes if you can do it that way. And then the birth becomes kind of a gentle surfacing instead of this radical kind of really traumatic transition. Now we brought Igor to the ITA conference in Prague, and people got infuriated, not by this, but this part. Everybody appreciated that, but there were some other things that he was doing with the babies, the binding of the arms, so the same response in London. They thought he should be put in prison. It was an abuse and so on. So again, there are people who are doing it without going to the extremes, to which Igor went.
Есть еще целая группа вопросов о голотропном дыхании, но мы не в состоянии, наверное, все их сейчас ответить, и нужно и все другие вопросы охватить. Я открою вам тайну. Стэн сейчас заканчивает новую книгу о голотропном дыхании, у него уже большая рукопись.
I would open you a secret. Stan just covered 2/3 of his next book, his recent book, devoted to the holotropic breathwork, and he invites everybody to send your histories and the scanned electronic copies of your drawings of post-session mandalas.
Information come. I lost a lot of that material in the fire of our house, unfortunately, and some of the mandalas that haven't been published yet. I lost all that. So I would be very, very grateful for anything in that category. Yeah.
Вы можете посылать это вот на сайт gtt@holotropic.com. Прямой линк к этому сайту. Это адрес, и этот адрес есть на сайте Grof Transpersonal Training, holotropic.com. Там можно послать просто вот файлы, или можете передать диск нам, и мы перешлем Стэну. There is also the whole series of questions about your connection with famous people like Carlos Castaneda, famous Russian philosopher and transpersonalist Vasily Nalimov, another famous transpersonalist Evgeny Torchinov, and his book Religions of the World. Are you familiar with them or not? And also your attitudes towards holodynamics by Vernon Woolf, yes. Werner Woolf. Я спросил, что есть целая серия вопросов об отношении Стэна к известным людям, вроде Василия Налимова, знаком ли он и с работами Карлоса Кастанеда, известного санкт-петербургского трансперсонолога, ныне покойного профессора Торчинова, его книги «Религии мира», в которой он очень много опирается на Стена Грофа, а также холодинамика Вернера Вульфа.
I have now a new website myself, where actually there's a link to an entire transpersonal gallery of pictures. I don't know if you made the connection or not. Have you
You sent me link, yes.
No, but in the website that you made.
Not yet. It's preliminary. It's not. It's testing still.
Yes,
Testing.
Yeah.
I think you give me this.
Yeah, this is where you see there are all kinds of things about the holotropic breathwork and the list of things that we do, list of events and so on.
Английский сайт-адрес очень простой. www.stanislavgrof.com. Запомнили? Станислав Гроф, одно слово.
Okay. And it has a link, again, very famous transpersonal psychologist, David Lukov, did several things that you might be interested in. One, Christina and I conducted nine of the ITA conferences, and all of them were recorded, video recorded and audio recorded, and I had them stored, and they actually were under the house, so they survived. And David Lukov became very interested in, and I donated this to the ATP, the Association of Transpersonal Psychology and Humanistic Psychology, and he is getting donations. They all will be available on DVDs. Everything that happened in all those conferences. Some really fantastic material. The first lecture that Rupert Sheldrake ever gave was in Bombay, for example. And so this, Muktananda's talk and this Karan Singh and Mother Teresa. And so there's going to be quite amazing material. And he also asked us to give him pictures. I haven't completed that process, but there's maybe, 100 pictures maybe, where you can see all kinds of people from the transpersonal field. Some of them who don't live anymore, David Bohm and so on. So that's available. I mean, that's you can sort of find it on the I don't know where I would start, because I met most of those people. Christina and I did these international transpersonal conferences that had a number of presenters, and there were some conferences which were organized by our friends. So there were 16 of these transpersonal conferences with a number of presenters. So there are very few people from the transpersonal field that we haven't met personally. Christina and I also did 30-month-long workshops at Esalen, where we had these people as guest faculty, and we collected there the energy basically for the ITA conferences. So Vasily Nalimov was a very, very dear friend, and as I mentioned, to my surprise, his book, had almost the same name as my first book, and we were able to invite Jana and Vasily to a conference in Santa Rosa. They were our personal guests, and then we visited them in Moscow when Vasily was still alive. So very, very close, very dear friend. I didn't know
There is a whole series of questions about current status of psychedelic therapy. Is there any legal program of psychedelic therapy? целая группа вопросов о современном состоянии в отношении... Тут целая серия вопросов, поэтому много вопросов с разных сторон. И я просто группирую, потому что все хотят получить ответ.
There is a kind of beginning renaissance of psychedelic research again, thanks to Rick Doblin, who is the president of an organization called MAPS, which stands for a multidisciplinary association for psychedelic studies, and he also issues a magazine, a newsletter, where you can find everything you can imagine what's happening in the world related to psychedelics, and you can get the past issues. Some of the program that began was actually Johns Hopkins, which was the university where I was I got the scholarship for, where I studied in the United States, and Bill Richards, who was somebody who worked with our team, and other researchers, just recently, several months ago, published a study, very well methodologically, statistically based, showing that psilocybin can cause mystical experiences. It was a very, very highly publicized study. At Harvard, they're starting now using psychedelics as well. There is a study conducted by Charles Grof using psilocybin with cancer patients. There's tremendous interest in the study which we did in the late 60s, early 70s, which is described in the last part of the book, The Ultimate Journey. You can find the description of the study and also the pictures of some of the figures that were involved. So that was kind of sleeping, for a lot of years, but now there is a renewed interest and people are replicating those studies in the United States. Somebody who did a whole holotropic training with us, Michael Midhofer with his wife, now are completing a study using MDMA, which is, the street name is ecstasy. Initially was XTC, and then became ecstasy, produced by Sasha Shalgin. They're using it in post-traumatic syndrome, which is an enormous problem in the United States. There are a lot of people who came from Vietnam with incredible problems. A number of years ago, the number of people who committed suicide as a result of post-traumatic syndrome from Vietnam superseded the number of people who were actually killed, American soldiers who were killed in Vietnam. And I don't want to think about the psychological condition of the American soldiers who are coming back from Iraq, because that is an unbelievably vicious situation where you really don't know who is the friend, who is the enemy, they don't know where it's coming from. And now they are extending their stay there and so on. This is going to be a problem for decades to deal with those problems. So they allowed this study, very, very successful study, using ecstasy in the post-traumatic syndrome. There is a large study, particularly interesting, in Burghölzli, which is the university clinic where Jung did, or university clinic in Zurich, where Jung did his basic studies with psychotic patients. And they have the permission to use several of the psychedelics and do some fascinating, not only clinical studies, but basic laboratory studies using the modern methods of imaging, which is very, very highly developed. So there are quite a few studies. I don't know what's happening with Krupitsky's study with the academy in St. Petersburg.
As now, they're closed.
It's closed? Okay. So yes, there are studies, and it seems that there will be more studies unless there will be another Leary who blows it for everybody. You know.
Следующая группа вопросов о проблеме наркомании. Является ли наркомания свободным выбором людей, которые стали наркоманами? Или это болезнь? То есть выбор это free choice or disease. И какие стратегии лечения зависимости и наркомании предлагает трансперсональный подход? Лучшие какие?
I mean, it's in no way this is choice. You know, these people have not only psychological disposition, they have also physiological. I think there's a general agreement in that. There is some kind of a chemical vicious circle which is happening. You can be, for example, you can drink heavily without becoming an alcoholic. But there are people who drink, and then they get to the point where the same amount does not have the same effect. They have to increase the dosages. They have withdrawal symptoms if they don't get the drug. They show not just sort of psychological suffering, but a lot of physical suffering and so on. So there is that combination. The work with holotropic state is very, very effective with that. We work both with 150 alcoholic, really serious, what we call in English skid row alcoholic. I don't know if there is a extreme. That we were in the state hospital in the alcoholic rehabilitation unit. We had a study using psychedelics with people who were heroin addicts taken from prison, and when they volunteered for our study, both in the control group and the study group, they could spend the rest of their time on parole, but they had to come every day to give a sample of urine. So we had day-to-day control, and those were, both of those studies were very successful. We have also a lot of people in our training who actually have a history of alcoholism or drug addiction, and they find the holotropic breathwork as being consistent with what's called in the 12-step program the 11th step, which is cultivating your connection with higher power, for having a spiritual experience. Now the thing that I have to say is we have never succeeded in breaking through the cycle as long as people were actively using. If somebody is in the middle of drinking and you make a psychedelic session or a holotropic session, it does not stop that. You need to have a sort of situation where you go through the withdrawal. You have to stop that, and then you can do very, very powerful work on the psychological dimension of this. But it didn't prove to be successful in,
And maybe the last but interesting question, since we have plenty of questions, and
Okay.
I'll give all them to you, and maybe through website you can give answers.
A little more work.
Мир без родовой травмы. Что это за мир? Есть ли в нем место для религии, власти, вооружений, криминала? World without birth trauma. What kind of world it could be?
Well, I would have to fantasize, the only situation without birth trauma I can imagine is a test tube baby, when you make the conception And I have never worked with anybody. I don't know what that kind of person would look like. But just knowing that consciousness can reach that far, you know, that we're really dealing with states of consciousness on all those levels, it horrifies me, some of the experiments which are being done. Christina and I went to Australia, and we arrived, and there were triumphant headlines. They had 6 fetuses whom they kept on ice for several months, and then they succeeded to implant one of them, and it took, you know, it developed, there's just no alternative to a situation where a couple of people who love each other, you know, conceive a child, they want the child, there is a certain emotional and physical hygiene of the pregnancy, there is a natural childbirth, there is a good handling afterwards, there is nursing and so on. The birth does not have just a traumatic impact. There's definitely something, I wouldn't say the ideal situation would be not to have birth at all. When there is a reasonable exposure to birth, it has a positive impact. The fact that the individual experiences the struggle, it's a challenge, you know, there's a struggle, and then emerges successfully, it leaves that person with a kind of cellular feeling of optimism. If trouble comes, I can be there, I can sort of, you know, stand with it and stay with it, and I can sort of come into successful completion. If that experience is not there, the people are not prepared for the difficulties. For example, cesarean people also have a lot of problems with breathing difficulties, because the struggle in the birth canal somehow trains, you know, mobilizes the whole respiratory system, makes it more viable. Now, if you have a situation where there is a forceps, you know, a difficult birth and a forceps, it leaves the person with a kind of defeatistic, kind of pessimistic, life is too difficult, I can't handle it, it's sort of too overwhelming and so on. And then another, I think, important thing, which is the question of anesthesia. Again, I have a medical background, I know that there are situations where you have to use it. I am not saying, you know, it should not be used under any circumstances. But in the United States, for example, in the 50s, the obstetrician started using it routinely. I mean, even in women who didn't want it, just for convenience. And I believe that the enormous epidemic of drug abuse, which is happening now in the United States, has something to do with this situation. If you imagine that, let's say the child had really good fetal experience and now goes through birth, and this is the first major struggle, dealing with pain, dealing with stress and so on. And then suddenly the process ends with anesthesia rather than a closure, a completion. On a cellular level, you're teaching that individual that if things get tough, the way out of it is just go for drugs, because they were taught that there is something called imprinting, which the people, ethologists like Nicholas Tinbergen or Konrad Lorenz, you know, have done. There's a phenomenon called imprinting. There's, for example, a period of 16 hours in the life of ducklings, and whatever moves around becomes the mother. So if you remove the mother and you walk around in red rubber shoes, they will follow the red rubber shoes. So these early experiences are extremely powerful. And so you start the life in a situation where the message is, you know, if you get in trouble, if you get in pain, if you know, the way to deal with it is a drug. which is very, very different to leave that person with a sense that they have the capacity to deal with problems. So I don't want you to leave here with, I don't want to give bad name to delivery. There is even a higher, if we want to go into kind of a far out reasoning, the kind of things that I described in the cosmic game, when people deal with real, ontological, cosmological problems and so on. A lot of people had the insight that one of the functions of birth is actually to create the sense of individuality and separateness. We come from a unified matrix, and the fact that we are sort of exposed to an uncomfortable situation makes us differentiate. This is the suffering me, and there is something out there that is doing to me, and it forges the sense of individuality. Other people felt that it actually also creates what Alan Watts, the British-American philosopher, also wrote some interesting books on psychedelics, joyous cosmology and so on. He called it the taboo against knowing who we are. It's the process in which we lose that sense of divinity that we talked about, you see. And the interesting thing is that if we really are open, if we accept that something like this is possible, then if the child then has good experience with the mother, that is the kind of the Atman project. This is the surrogate for the divine, that this still taste of sort of luminosity, so that connection is not severed as severely as somebody who has difficult birth and then really abandoned or rejected in childhood and so on. So it seems to leave people with more of a sense of wonder of the world and sort of appreciation, connection with other people, with nature and so on. So I think that the solution really would be to create a good situation for pregnant women. I mean, if I were in a position of power, I would create special situations for pregnant women. I give them a sort of a beautiful residence somewhere on the ocean or in the mountains. I don't think it's great for women to be pregnant in Manhattan, or with all these sort of vibrations, sounds, horns. Biology is not trained for something like this. This is happening the last century. I mean, on the biological level, that kind of languages. This is Tyrannosaurus Rex coming. There's something horrendous is happening, or 747. Or some of these sounds. If you imagine that if there is consciousness, which I believe there is, what these children have to go through. And there were much worse things, like under the communists. All women had to work, and many of them worked in factories where not only mechanical vibrations but all kinds of toxic things. I think it would pay, the society to produce a situation where pregnant women would get very special kinds of circumstances, and we just create the best possible circumstances for pregnancy and birth.